I like to read Outside magazine online, often when I'm falling asleep at night, just because I'm curious about the type of people who would do things like wrestle an alligator or summit Everest without oxygen, things that I would never do, but I'm intensely curious about, hearing the near disasters and near scrapes. And this past week, they had an article about a man in Wisconsin named Tim Fried. Did anyone happen to see this article? Oh, good, okay, so you're hearing this for the first time. And again, if you're afraid of snakes, brace yourself. Outside magazine sent their only reporter who's been bitten by a rattlesnake and survived, and had written a harrowing survival story about his recovery from rattlesnake bite. They sent this poor journalist to interview Tim Fried in Wisconsin. Tim is a keeper of venomous snakes. His passion is collecting and caring for, in his snake lab, all kinds of snakes. And you can safely import them to the US. They show up to his house in boxes clearly marked with bright yellow labels, snake, and then in parentheses, S. Snake or snakes? Can you imagine a more horrifying package arriving? Now, Tim realized long ago that if he got bitten with one of his most poisonous snakes, the taipan, while caring for them in their tanks, he could be dead before anyone found him. And so he started milking his snakes of their venom and slowly injecting himself with bigger and bigger doses. I am afraid to get my flu shot every year. One night, when he realized he was up to an average snake bite's worth of venom, he let his taipan bite him. And believe it or not, because they know him so well, sometimes snakes are not willing to bite. But he got the snake to bite him, and he has a photograph on his fridge of him proudly standing unaffected by one of the most dangerous snakes in the world. What happens when you get bitten by a snake that you haven't successfully envenomated yourself with repeatedly over a course of months, as most of us have not, I would hope, is that your body releases a cascade of antibodies. Most of them are wrong. But how often do we get bitten by snakes? The body does the best it can do. If it does a better job, you'll probably live. If it does a worse job, you go to the hospital. Hopefully you're still awake and can tell them what the snake looked like. Hopefully you live in a major city with a large snake population. You're in New Delhi or something like that. And they can give you the proper kind of antivenom. If they get it wrong, you die. The same night that Tim Fried did his first snake experiment and survived the bite of the taipan, he was feeling very confident. He was feeling brave and proud of himself, and that same night, his black mamba bit him accidentally. He was in a coma for 4 days. He got too bold, he got too confident. And after he woke up, he realized that it was not enough to be immune to one snake. If he was going to keep this hobby up and do it safely, he would have to be immune to all snakes. And what followed was a masterclass in human curiosity, as over the next 19 years he endured over 700 snake bites and became immune to almost every deadly snake on the planet. You know, I'm dedicated to a lot of things. And I don't think I've ever been dedicated to any of them as much as Tim Fried was dedicated to this. He got into his head the idea that if his antibodies were successfully winnowing themselves down to the smallest and most correct arrangement, the fewest antibodies to cover the most snakes, that his blood might potentially save the lives of the 80 to 130,000 people every year who die of snake bites. Later he said, I traded my life for theirs, because he lost his job, his wife, and his children because of this experiment. just when he was getting tired of being repeatedly bitten by snakes, it only took 19 years, he was about to give up, because you have to do this repeatedly to keep up your immunizations. You have to get booster bites. A biologist found him on YouTube, one of his many videos of him getting repeatedly bitten in the arm by a black mamba, and contacted him. And now scientists are studying his blood to come up with a universal antivenom. The World Health Organization has classified tropical snake bites as a neglected tropical disease, opening up more room for funding and research, because there is no universal way of caring for people who've been snake bitten, and yet it affects so many more than those who die. 400,000 people a year lose a limb to a snake bite. And how many humans are willing and curious enough to test on themselves snake bites? Just Tim Fried. But it could be that that's all we need. Now, psychologists sometimes study what it is that motivates humans to do anything. The obvious ones are we eat when we're hungry, we're driven to reproduce, we also need to sleep. Those basic biological urges are pretty easy to explain. But why do humans do any of the other things we do? Why do we have hobbies, for instance? Do hobbies contribute to our survival? Keeping snails has not kept me alive, as far as I know, and certainly Tim Fried's obsession with getting bitten by snakes has not done anything to prolong his life. But in the late 1960s, the psychologist Robert White came up with the idea of affectance as a psychological drive. Affectance says that humans are driven biologically to make changes to our environments around us and to see the results. And that there might be a survival component to this, that we need to experiment on things and see that there are results. The human who climbs the most trees just to see what will happen, just to see what's at the top of a tree, just to see how many pine cones they can find, is the human who survives when a cougar jumps out from behind a bush, or when the enemy comes to invade the town. So not all of our deepest motivations are strictly biological. It could be argued that within humans, built into our DNA, is curiosity. I was watching a video recently of snails developing in the embryo because I think they're cool. I'm curious about things. And when they're only as big as 8 cells across, they start to rotate in the egg. That's when the first spiral begins to form. 8 cells across. And being a theologian, I got to thinking that if snails had a God, if they had a sense of the divine, it would look like a spiral. Sometimes I think that if humans have any conception of the divine, it must come with curiosity and creativity. What is it we honor here in each other but our differences, our beautiful variations among us? And even our biological urges, what are they more than the desire to co-create, to combine and recombine into ever new forms and varieties? Life wants to live, but it also wants to create new life. In new forms, new evolutions, ever growing, ever evolving. If we have a God, it's a God of curiosity, creativity, experimentation, joy in the sheer multitude of possibilities. There are so many ways in our individual lives that we can go about making this so, living a holy life, a life that honors the divine nature of creativity. A life that honors each of our individual potentials to explore the beautiful universe of which we are a part. For Tim Fried, it's getting bitten 700 times by snakes just to see what will happen. And in his case, it turns out that what will happen is potentially saving more human lives. I can't think of any practice more religious than that kind of devotion. What devotion? Even if the research never comes to anything, I think that is a religious act. And so I invite all of you to meditate on where in your lives you show greatest curiosity and how it helps you live out your fullest spiritual potential.